security and video partner sales for safe cities and venues. I'll be your moderator today, chiming in with my own bit of knowledge on video, but I'm also joined by some of my esteemed colleagues, and I'm very excited to have this dialogue today. It should be very, very insightful. We will talk about digital transformation and the impacts from AI and edge computing through an industry lens. And we'll also discuss opportunities for industries such as healthcare, public sector, utilities and energy, and retail, in addition to some of those horizontal technologies like video and how those impact the verticals. So I'd like to get started. I'm going to have my colleagues go ahead and introduce themselves. And what I'd like to do is have each of them give their view on the state of the industry from their lens. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Yamaya Bourdain. Yamaya, please introduce yourself and give us your thoughts on your industry.
Hi, Yamaya Bourdain here. I lead global public sector sales at Intel Corporation in the IoT segment. Our team drives education, defense and aerospace, civilian government, from fed, state, and local down to smart cities and even communities segments. And digital transformation is something that governments at every single level strive to do in order to keep citizens safe, keep them healthy, and keep them thriving. And so we enable governments to do that by providing steadfast defense, education, transportation, and other services, which often with the help of technology, and including our technology. And so we deliver these building blocks for high performance and security enabled solutions that enable you to support and empower citizens.
Excellent, that's great. Let's go ahead and Mike Bates. Mike.
Hi, Cassia, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, Mike Bates, I lead our energy sales on the same team with Imaya and Ed and Cassia. And for Intel Energy, it includes the oil and gas industry as well as the power utility industry, along with sustainability for corporate customers that are driving aggressive sustainability development goals. And we're also moving into smart water and smart food, smart ag, mostly kind of resilient food supplies. In our space, digital transformation, and I think probably everybody listening and attending today recognizes the transition that's happening in the energy space, moving from kind of carbon-based generation, carbon-based energy to clean, lower carbon, more resilient, whether it's to drive the impacts of or to reduce the impacts of climate change, or even change the arc of climate change. But it's an area that is getting a lot of focus, a lot of attention, a lot of focus, especially on the edge, the need to drive edge compute, which I think for some of the solutions that we're going to talk about today might fit. So again, thank you for your time and look forward to our conversation today. Thanks.
Glad to have you here, Mike. And next is David Dobson, joining us from Europe.
Hey, Cassia, thanks so much for inviting me today. And yeah, so I'm David Dobson. I look after 3 core industries globally for Intel. One is retail, hospitality, and retail banking. So I kind of group them together in terms of the consumer is kind of what links all of those industries. I guess kind of digital transformation has been quite different depending on which one of those industries you look at. But obviously all the stuff that we've been going through in the last 12, 18 months has significantly impacted the ability to go visit some of those businesses and some of the physical retail hotels, or even go to the bank in the way that you previously did. So there's been a lot of disruption in our industry, and there's definitely been an acceleration of digital transformation over that time period. And the disruption is not over for sure. I think in the next 12 months, as we kind of come out, hopefully, of this kind of crazy world we've all been living in, they will continue to drive and evolve. And if there was one kind of one major theme that kind of links that digital transformation in all of those industries, it's the growth in online business, in the way online has grown hugely in the last 12 months. Yeah, so that's me, and that's what we're probably going to talk about later on.
Excellent, excellent, thanks. And Ed Buffone.
Yeah, hi, Cassia. Thanks, and appreciate the time here. So yeah, I'm Ed Buffone. I lead our health and life sciences sector here at Intel, on our global team that looks after that industry. And we really focus on the entire ecosystem of health and life science, everything from maker to provider to payer, and in that, I would say, what we have seen, at least in the last 12 to 18 months, in terms of digital transformation, is sort of this accelerated mode of implementing new technology. It's not an industry. Healthcare is not an industry that traditionally has implemented new technologies in what we call a rapid pace. However, now they are moving at what we have dubbed pandemic space or pace, and and we're seeing that, healthcare, given that healthcare right now is over a third of the world's data and is on pace to outstrip all other industries by 2025. There is a rapid need to transform the way they work, the way the workflows happen, and the kinds of things they respond to. Last year, for instance, as a result of the pandemic, telehealth became, the hot technology for everyone to deploy, and it went from being a sort of a side experiment for many to over 1 billion visits globally. So, we're seeing this rapid pace of innovation in healthcare, unlike we've ever seen before, and we're seeing rapid adoption by governments to support that and approvals. So we're really hoping we're up for the challenge. We're driving a lot of new enablement, everything from telehealth to real-time clinical insights and a whole host of other areas that we work in. So we're looking forward to sharing some of that on today's program, and we thank you for letting us be part of it.
Yeah, Ed, the healthcare space has been amazing to watch, definitely, for the last year. I mean, obviously the pandemic really kicked everything into high gear across, I think, all of our businesses. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. I think as I kind of take it to a horizontal perspective, I look at video, for example, one of Convergent's core businesses with their customers. There's about over 1 billion cameras installed globally. And you mentioned the rapid advancement in healthcare. This goes across a lot of the businesses: AI, computer vision, deep learning capabilities. The development time has really increased, enabling our customers to really harness the data and get predictive insights from that data. And I think another important element is the costs are starting to come down as well. And while the industry faces some other challenges, I think in general, the technology and the rapid advancements has been made available to many more people than it would have previously. I think in all of our industries, another element is cyber. It's an important discussion to have across the industries. Each has its own unique unique view, but with all the same challenge with cyber. So, given the IoT space and the expansion of that and how the pandemic has hit everyone, I think the attack area has increased. So looking at, not only video, but then how do you add your, cyber risk mitigation into that across industries, I think will be really important. So with that, I want to talk about the technology for each vertical and kind of what are you guys seeing relative to the use of AI and computer vision and deep learning and things at the edge that customers may not be aware of for that particular industry, but would love to hear more of your thoughts on that. So we'll go ahead and go to you, Maya, and would love to hear what you're seeing in the public sector. Oh, you're on mute.
I forget to pull myself off. Yeah, so thanks so much. While cities and regional governments are working to help citizens return to their family places, their familiar places, and their routines, they're adding these new layers of protection. And so governments must enable social distancing and do what they can to keep shared spaces clean, as hygienic as possible. And so computer vision can be used to support these areas and these aims, and they can track and control the number of people that are flowing through a given space. They can automatically close ticket barriers to limit crowding in large venues, and in places within buildings and services that are providing services, and particularly for government services where people want to actually see your face as you deliver these services to them. In smart buildings, you can monitor access and review video feeds and run environmental systems using computer vision. We also see in emergencies, you can share camera feeds and building data with public safety officials and first responders. So there's a myriad of applications in what's from smart street lights to smart traffic signals, smart intersections, and emergency vehicles that all come together to provide these solutions and keep cities safe.
I completely agree with you. I mean, there's so much advancement in cities. Cities have been faced with a lot of challenges over the last year. And while we saw, rapid advancement in cities and adopting technologies and wanting to make their cities smart and livable and really attract people to move there, I think it really accelerated in such a big way. And there's so many concerns across the board relative to a city. Energy and sustainability are, big focus areas for cities, for example. I think the technology there and what the focus is, there's a lot to be learned, but there's also a lot of new, really interesting, cool stuff. So Mike, how is AI and computer vision, deep learning impacting your area, and what technologies are you seeing that are really making a difference?
Well, there's a couple. Thanks for the question. First of all, I think this has more to do with kind of the impacts of climate change. I think most of the folks here are aware of some of the weather-related emergencies that we've had. I live here in Austin, Texas, so I was part of the big winter freeze out here. And then I know there's been the rolling blackouts in California that are due to wildfires. In a lot of cases, those customers that are supplying the energy are looking for ways to mitigate those risks. And in one case, particularly in California, working with Pacific Gas and Electric to develop kind of a visual data analytics platform that can take drone video feeds from the electric crews that are out doing their service, and then bring those feeds together to look for areas on the grid that are particularly sensitive to the impacts of wildfires, for example, and do more precision-like outages in those more danger areas where potentially you can see things on the lines, or there's some alert in an area. So that, I think that's one real great use case for video and the use for visual data analytics to look for opportunities and use cases. And I think in the other case, especially in the smart city example that you asked about, one of the big trends that we're following is this movement towards more distributed energy resources, as I mentioned before, clean, renewable energy resources. And what that means is, we're moving from kind of the era of centralized power with a big coal plant, 3 counties away, and it's the electricity is brought to your home, to a new system that features, hundreds and thousands and potentially millions of distributed energy devices, things like, rooftop solar on a commercial facility, battery storage, electric vehicles. So those are all new assets that are going to be deployed at the very edge of the grid, that become, both from cyber and physical security, become potential kind of weak links in the energy system. So there's a big promise in this move toward distributed, but there's a lot of there are a lot of associated things that we have to think about as we go. So one application that we're working with one utility on is video surveillance of these distributed energy resources, those that are integrated into the grid, that are critical to the operation of the grid, as part of their overall cybersecurity and physical security. So again, there's a big opportunity there as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think one of the areas, and David, you have a couple areas, right? While they have some similarities to them, they are different, from retail to hospitality to banking and finance. So would love to hear your thoughts on each one, relative to what technologies you see impacting those spaces.
Yeah, sure. I think the problem that all of these industries have been wrestling with over the years is they kind of interact with their customers in two different ways, in an online mode and in a physical mode. And online, they know everything about the customer. Every time you move the cursor, or every time you scroll on your phone, they kind of know everything that you do. They know all your selection criteria. They know what you have looked at, what you haven't looked at. And then you go to the physical environment and then know nothing about those shoppers. So the potential has always been there for video AI inference to really get a close insight on those customers. But the problem has always been, I think you touched on it, Cassia, earlier, is the cost of deploying these solutions at scale has been super expensive. So I think the interest in doing it has been there for a long time. I think what changed last year was a couple of different things. One is safety became super important, and safety not just for your own employees. And for a lot of these companies, like hospitality businesses and retail outlets especially, loss prevention was the big security topic and that they wanted to talk about. Well, now suddenly it's safety and security. So yes, they're still concerned about security of their products, that people don't walk out without paying. But now they also want to be secure in terms of how they manage the physical estate. You can imagine with these businesses being closed down, that's a prime theft location, right? So how do you secure those locations when you're kind of in that lockdown mode became the first thing that they looked at. And then when people started to come back, it's kind of how can you convince your customer that it's a safe environment that you are operating, and also that it's safe for your employees, right? Your employees are as important as the customers for many of these businesses. So they wanted to ensure that safety. So some of the first things, use cases that you would see would be maybe a traffic light system on the door. Yes, the number of people in the store is below the capacity, so it's safe for you to come in. Make sure social distancing. I think Maya talked about that before. That's super important, both in your operations, but also in your physical places that your customers would shop in. And so a lot of those systems started to be deployed. And then cameras became more readily available. So I think the other thing that both Maya and Mike talked about is multiple use cases for these cameras. So people are starting to say, okay, now we've got a larger number of cameras deployed in these locations. What else can we do with it? Can we do some of that customer insight? Can we do some additional things within your physical location? And there's so many different use cases that have kind of come out of this this last 12 months. And one example in quick service restaurants is around health and safety. Are people in your kitchen behaving in a regulatory manner? Are they washing their hands often enough? Are they disposing of your food in the right way? Are they overcooking or undercooking the food? So there's loads of different scenarios, and everywhere you look around the retail environment or the hospitality environment, and even in the banking environment, there's so many different use cases and possibilities for cameras and AI inference.
I think it's something to note on that, being able to run, whether it's in the energy and utility space or public sector or retail or even healthcare, being able to run those complex algorithms and the time to develop those has really shortened, right? The technology's just come so fast, and you can now run those at the edge, right? So in a retail setting, that is the edge, right? And being able to run those, with no external GPU, for example, using the compute power with CPU to be able to run those is definitely an advancement in my view across all the industries. And I like to call it data diversification, right? So you can process your data at the edge, you can keep what you need on-prem, and then you can send the rest to the cloud. It just all depends on your policies and how you're treating your privacy policies and so forth. But I think the opportunity, the flexibility to be able to run those complex algorithms in a more cost-effective way is here, and it's now, right? The computer vision market isn't slowing down. We see it being $48 billion by 2023, and the deep learning market is 28 billion by 2023. So there's no slowing down. It's a fast moving train. And from our view, for the crowd that's here, from our view, it's fast moving. We're seeing the industry adopt the new technology. So, but with that said, I mean, I think the last year, healthcare has certainly been at the forefront of a lot. And Ed, from your perspective, how is your industry, taking in computer vision and AI and deep learning, and what changes are you seeing happening there in your industry?
Well, it's been pretty profound across all of healthcare, I would say. I think there's a general belief that AI has changed and will forever change the way patients will be treated going forward, and it will increase the efficacy of the treatment, if you will, because those providing the treatment will just be doing it from a stronger base of knowledge, based on all of the learnings that we've had. I mean, AI has rapidly become used in sort of the whole diagnostic care, in trying to create additional learned insights, because machines can see lots more things than humans can, understand, if you will. I mean, I can teach a machine to see 1,000,000 images. I can't teach a radiologist to see that many in his or her lifetime.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that technology really drive advancements in healthcare, quite a bit, both on the treatment side, as well as on the, sort of the physical side of the treatment facility, right? So you've got, you talked about smart cities and whatnot. Hospitals are nothing more than a very smart city whose only business is healthcare. And so, some of the same examples you talk about in the city apply to every hospital in the world. And even David was talking about, sort of the safety. Well, in a hospital system, safety is of utmost concern, and when they're not safe, bad things happen. And so, that camera technology is used to make sure, surgeons are scrubbing properly, and if they don't, they fail audits, and people are sanitizing properly, and the right people going into the right section of the right hospital is sort of monitored. So it's a whole safety, wellness, it's everything on the scale that you'd expect to both provide better care, when you're sick, but also to provide better things so that you don't get sick.
Mhm.
The last thing people want is to go to the hospital and get something they didn't go in with. And so, all of those technologies help to do that. So we're really quite bullish on, I use the word AI broadly. There's a piece of it that's AI, and there's a piece of it that's some very much deep learning and analytics. Analytics are probably the most, a great big runway for us right now, and where I think AI will become more and more important over time.
Yeah, I think the healthcare space just is so interesting to me. Just the amount of change it's seen, and certainly our first responders and healthcare providers. I mean, just so thankful for them. And I think the work that you guys are doing in healthcare is pretty amazing in terms of supporting our healthcare providers throughout the pandemic. So thank you for that, Ed, because I know there was a lot of work behind the scenes to help our healthcare providers across the nation. I think what I'd like to, maybe touch on too, I know a lot of the world has a little bit of, the COVID starting to, we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, right? We're starting, many of us saw in our spaces last year, kind of a quick advancement or a quick adoption, I should say, of technologies in all of your industries. I certainly did on the video side relative to many different technologies, including analytics and camera technology, temperature scanning, things like that. There was this quick jump to start utilizing the technology, and some of it probably is going to, fade away, and some of it will continue on. And so, from my perspective, I looked at over the last year when we were talking to customers about physical security and in their environments and the technologies to help them with, crowd occupancy levels, mask on, mask off. you know, a lot of the times we would talk to the customers and say, okay, what is the long-term purposeful use of that technology? And you know, because many customers didn't want to adopt it and then not have to use it anymore. So how do you integrate that in? So there was an opportunity for discussion with our end user customers that said, hey, how do you apply these technologies in a way that are going to help your business long term? So you know, I don't want to you know, go too deep on COVID, but I do think there's learnings from the last year from a technology perspective. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how COVID has really changed your industry and what you think the opportunities are. So kind of a two-part question, right? The COVID view, and then what are the opportunities you think customers should be looking at that may be listening to this today? What are the opportunities they should look at in their space? So why don't we jump to Yamaya, and you can get us started, and we can have a lively conversation on that part.
Yeah, this is so interesting because, you know, I'd say that government tends to move so much slower than any other area when it comes to adopting technology on the defense side. We say that, you know, in defense, we're always using yesterday's technology. In today's world, where commercial is leading, you know, technological advancements, but in a few specific subsegments, just to talk through this. On education, we didn't talk about this much, but you know, the pandemic brought on the real education revolution that we've been waiting for. You know, and that is including the digitization. I'm sorry, I can't speak. Of learning.
Digitalization, yes, I think I couldn't say it either.
So learning is becoming digitized, and before, you know, there was a need, but and there was a critical need, but it wasn't quite on the fast track. And now the pandemic has changed all of that, and educators and administrators and communities and students, they're facing new challenges. And technology is really the key to improving the access, the engagement, and outcomes. And so you know, some of the technologies that's being adopted today through the pandemic, it's really driving the transformation of education being conducted everywhere.
Yeah.
On the defense and aerospace side, you know, there's been this an increase of new portfolio imperatives. Aerospace got hit extremely hard through the pandemic. Aerospace is still kind of, you know, it's starting to be resolved, and things are starting to pick up, but not quite there. And so the pandemic has highlighted a need for digital transformation in aerospace and defense, and building resilience and unleashing growth in aerospace and defense segments. And so the commercial segment is kind of witnessing this shift from supply-led to demand-driven manufacturing and supply chain, and with rising kind of regional tension across the globe, and that coupled with defense platform replacements in the US and in Europe, there will be a continued need to drive demand in the defense and commercial aerospace industry. And so this reduced aircraft demand, coupled with the trend to move from product to innovative service-based business models, and that powered by data, this is reshaping the industry. And this is what, you know, I believe that the aerospace and defense market is going to take with them in how things have in the response to the pandemic. And then as we see in organizations and in servicing public spaces, particularly public buildings, including, say, like the VA hospital. We're seeing these adoption of smart space technologies that we believe will continue to be needed. This has helped these government services to become more accessible and more efficient to citizens. And so today, you know, keyless entry, video and security analytics in these services in these buildings, kiosk in these buildings, and then, you know, kind of navigating the working environment with beyond social distance monitoring and touchless doors and elevators, but also we're seeing integration of like voice assistants and chatbots, you know, and you like, oh my gosh, government is actually adopting these things, right? These are really enabling services overall to be provided to citizens in a more efficient and effective way.
Yeah. There's so much movement in government these days, especially, I don't know if you saw, you know, President Biden release some guidelines on how the government will handle cybersecurity, for example. I know that's an area, you know, we've talked about, and so much change happening there, you know, and so much technology that can help mitigate risk there for our government, but also for businesses. So that's definitely, you know, top of mind for our government leaders, right? But I completely agree about the smart spaces, Imai. I know we've talked a lot about how that's changed the landscape. An area that, you know, we've talked about is venues, for example. The idea of getting people back into a venue safely. Many teams, for example, you know, some cities own the venues, some teams own the venues. You know, being able to effectively use smart space technology that enables you to bring fans and large groups of people back into a space safely is really important. And we're seeing a, you know, huge adoption of that technology, and looking at the long-term purposeful use of it, not just for a short-term gain, but how do I effectively use this longer term? How does it change the fan experience, for example, in a venue? How does the transportation network outside of that venue help, you know, throughout the city, making sure it's a seamless, you know, ride to an event? You know, so we're seeing a lot of that transform cities as well. You know, venues tend to be a smart city in themselves. So lots of smart space technology that we see being adopted, and quick development times. A lot of companies developing new technologies that can be adopted there. Mike, hey, what about energy and utilities? I know we've talked with some large customers who have to protect some of our, you know, utility and energy areas, and you know, from a COVID perspective, what changes have you seen over the last year? And then secondly, what are the opportunities you see in the energy and utility space? You mentioned the firefighting and things like that earlier, but and sustainability. So we'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think it was a couple of impacts in our industry. I mean, obviously, retail, health and life sciences, government education had much bigger impacts, especially travel industry. The impacts on the energy side were a little more subtle. So for example, a lot of our electric utilities who run and operate the grid from a central command and control center, they didn't really have the luxury, at least in the beginning, of, you know, 6-foot social distancing. And that's where the compute resided, at that site. So I think it exposed the, I guess, a weakness that requiring that type of intense command and control operation. And we started to work with utilities to push out some of that to remote locations where smaller groups of workers could work without having to expose themselves, and it happened pretty quickly. And I think that trend is likely to continue. And again, when you think about remote operations for mission critical ops, it's a little different story than remote workers like ourselves. So a lot of technology has been put in place, especially around secure device onboarding and cybersecurity for compute that's pushed out to these remote facilities. I think in the oil and gas side, a little different story. One, I think COVID really woke up the oil and gas industry to the sensitivity of their supply chain. We saw economies kind of go to a grinding halt, and you know, the supply of oil and gas and demand for that went to a grinding halt as well. I think that really is pushing the oil and gas companies to look at their business model. So if anything, it might have expedited the energy transition happening, the oil and gas companies moving into the more clean energy space. But a more practical application that's part of that is their interest in reducing operations at the far edges of their operations. So digital oil field, for example. So we're working with a lot of oil and gas companies that are putting out kind of video capabilities to do, for instance, we had unmanned production facilities or unmanned offshore facilities where they used to send employees out to do real-time monitoring. This is like visualization of actual analog gauges and then digitizing those into a platform that allows you to convert that from an analog to digital. Again, that allows an oil and gas company to reduce that cost of the employee. So managing the operational cost in the middle of a downturn. And I think those types of technologies will stay as well. I think there's always going to be sensitivity on the oil and gas supply side and the price of oil and gas. So I think the movement towards unmanned operations is here to stay and replaced with more automation. I think a lot of that is video driven.
Can you do something about the gas prices in California, Mike?
Yeah, I guess they're anticipating everybody to jump in their car and do some traveling this summer, but
I think we're at $5 a gallon. I mean, you know,
oh wow.
The folks in Europe are probably laughing, like we've been there forever, but
I wish.
yeah, so I you know, oil and gas is near and dear to my heart. I worked in that space a long time ago. So they have a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunity with how to use AI and you know, computer vision, deep learning to help their business. I like what you said about the downturn and the ability to, you know, it's really building in resiliency into their business, right? How do you effectively use technology to help you do that? Technology and policies and procedures and so forth, but being able to be resilient, I think that's probably part of what that industry's learned over the last year is amongst many of the industries probably.
Yep.
David, I mean, I think you know, retailers, man, have been hit really hard. Small businesses the last year, hospitality certainly. So yeah, I think we've all lived and breathed what those industries are going through. But your perspective on how COVID, you know, impacted, but what you see the opportunities are going forward with those industries, given people are starting to get out again and you know, really start to re-engage in the community and with retailers and so forth. And you know, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. And you know, listening to the team on this call is really interesting, you know, how connected our industries are, right? So in governments, in cities, you know, guess what there's retail outlets, you know, even in military bases, like where would you go without convenience store and some kind of retail outlet? Yeah, in the healthcare space, we've seen a distribution of vaccines come through retail in North America, right? So it's kind of connects a lot of our industries. One of the things Mike and I have talked about is kind of, you know, you just talked about gas stations. Guess what? They have convenience stores with them. And we're seeing a lot of trend where EV charging stations are starting to be deployed at retail outlets, right, in the car parks and in the malls. So there is a big connection across this whole space. I know we haven't talked much about manufacturing on the call today, but a lot of these retailers, they have their own manufacturing and distribution and warehousing. So actually, one of the things I kind of tell the team and coach, you know, our sellers is think broader. Don't just think about the store from a retail perspective. Think about the upstream as well as the kind of endpoint where they meet the retailers, and then you'll see a lot of synergy across all the work that we do and how you can maximize your opportunity. But one thing in terms of COVID, you know, that there's two kind of profiles of customer that I work with in my space. One is the kind of the essential retailers, and they've kind of been a little bit of the unsung heroes of this pandemic, right? Because I know 100% with what you said about our healthcare workers, you know, kudos to them. They've done a fantastic job and we'll love them for a long time or forever for doing what they've done. But, you know, if you couldn't eat, it's nice to be cured of a disease, but if you can't eat and you don't have food on your plate, then, you know, you ain't gonna be around for very long. And that's what these retail workers, right, in this essential space, they've been out there every day bringing that food to the locations, either to our home or to the and they've kept that business kind of going. Now, there's the other ones that you mentioned rightly that have been in a real tough space because they've been forced to close down. Hotels, stadiums, a lot of the things that we all love to do when we've got a bit of extra time and when we've maybe got a bit of extra money. That's been really badly impacted by COVID. So a couple of the things that they're looking at in terms of investments to reopen it's back to that safety and security. So can they create an environment that people are comfortable to go back to? And we're starting to see where states in the US are open, countries around the world as they open up, the hospitality starting to bounce back. That thing that I was talking about with online, it reached a peak of retail trade. About 30% of all retail trade was being done online at one point during this pandemic. That's kind of bounced back to about 20%, but that's still 4 years growth that happened in 1 year. So still an acceleration, but it's kind of come back as people have started to open out. So anything around that space, we see things like curbside pickup, like drive-through touchless technologies, quite an interesting one. Cassia, using cameras instead of being able to touch a device, but actually be able to go close to the device and the camera detects where you are, and you can create a safe, non-infectious point for interaction with technologies. We've seen the likes of Amazon and some of the other industry leaders looking at what they would call just walk out technology, the ability to walk into, whether it's a quick service restaurant or whether it's a retail outlet, pick up the items you go, and instead of queuing at that, checkout with the basket, you just put it in your bag and you go, right? So again, all of that is using camera-based technology. The cost of that is coming down. The knowledge around how to build those solutions is becoming more widespread. And as you say, the technology is evolving and that's driving down some of that cost. And so there's a whole raft of technologies to support that. And I think the one other trend which maps back to what Mike was talking about a little bit there is we're also seeing a lot of these retailers really taking sustainability seriously, right? Moving away from sustainability being a thing that you have to do corporately, but actually just being a fundamental piece of what you do to be in business. The industries that I work with, they listen to the consumer very closely and they follow consumer trends very carefully because they have to maintain the relevance. And a lot of these places you only go to because you want to go to. So they need to be super conscious of what everybody is doing and saying. So sustainability is becoming a huge issue for them. And I think, in terms of a lot of technology choices that they're making at the moment in that sustainability area, there's a lot of interest in terms of things like, reusable economy, this circular economy. But also in terms of optimization of the resources that they use. There's a lot of interest in AI technologies to improve the carbon footprint of their business. So a lot to swallow there, but there's huge trends happening in our industry.
I think I always joke with people about my favorite retailer, when they reopened, the use of analytics, in their cameras, being able to see how many people could come in the store or not, and know what the occupancy was. And instead they had a guy standing at the door just with an iPhone, marking off every person. I thought, well, you got 6 cameras over here. So I think, but I think, you have small retailers that handle it in a more manual way. And then you have larger retailers that, are looking at that long-term purposeful use of, to your point, David, about they know a lot about us online. I fell for it yesterday. I got an ad and I did buy something.
It works.
They know what to deliver to me. And I bought, but being able to know who you are online and who you are in the store, I think that technology, is just ripe for adoption.
And just interesting in one of the points you made there, the smaller retailers actually are adopting that kind of people counting technology faster than the larger retailers. And there's a dynamic at work there. If you're in a convenience store, you might have 1 or 2 people in that store. So if you take one of those people and you put them at the door, that's 50% of your head count down. But you're in a big Target, you've got hundreds of people in that store. So one person standing at the door, that's not so much of a problem. So it's actually faster adoption in that smaller store environment where you really are restricted in terms of the number of people. So just an interesting nuance, because we kind of predicted, similar to you, it would be the big guys that would adopt it quickly. But there you go.
I think too, the supply chain comment you made about someone like an Amazon, and that links, I mean, everything's connected here, right? You have supply chain, you have transportation, all of the supply chain being transported through those means, the delivery drivers being able to know what inventory they have, when and where they need to get it there. Like the technology was, and it's not just standard technology, but it's really that AI being able to know when and where items are and how long it's going to take and what is needed. I mean, it really rapidly evolved. I think we're going to go ahead and we're nearing the end of our time. And so we're going to wrap it up with Ed. Although we've talked a lot about healthcare in terms of, we know healthcare is at the forefront of the last year, but from your perspective, what are opportunities for healthcare providers and companies that are developing solutions for healthcare? What would be your advice in that space on what are the opportunities?
Well, I would say that you're right, and we saw a lot of activity in healthcare, and we continue to as a result of the focus on it. But I think the opportunities lie in well, there's a few key areas. One of in healthcare, 97% of the data that's collected goes unused. So there's a massive opportunity in using that data to provide some incremental insights into sort of the whole patient process, right? In terms of the care, the care programs as well as treatment programs and whatnot. The other area is really one that has resonated, in some of the stuff that you all have spoken about, and just recently, David, in some of his most comments just a minute ago, I call it digital convenience, right? So the patients, acting on their health are not different than they are and acting on how they buy other things. They're buying, the table is turned, and the patient is now the consumer of healthcare. And there's in many cases, as we get into sort of the generations go on, you're going to see much more self-management of that. And in that, they continue to look for digital convenience. So telehealth was really just the tip of that, right? The ability to, consult with a clinician or have a conversation without having to, drive 30 minutes to an office, sit in a waiting room and find out, in 5 minutes what the problem is or what you should do next. There's no reason why that couldn't have been done remotely. And so we're seeing that whole digital convenience, and I don't mean just that, but the whole idea of then where do you provide care? We're seeing this whole distributed care concept move forward, where it's probably not outside the realm that in the next couple of years, if you needed an ultrasound on your kneecap, you would go to CVS or Walgreens to get it done instead of a hospital or a radiation, radioactive, or sorry, radiology center.
Yeah.
So the point is I think it's under the banner of digital convenience. There's a whole lot of that will occur in healthcare. Now, there's also massive opportunities in the data, in the securing of the data. Security breaches in healthcare cost lots of money. Because there's all kinds of fines and everything else because of the amount of personal information that's at risk. And that's not a US thing, that's a global thing. So I think there's plenty of opportunities in all those areas. But I do think that the drive to make AI more important and utilize the data we already have is going to be probably the number one, sort of money grab. And then the other one will be sort of the whole concept of digital convenience in healthcare.
I think you hit it on the data and the privacy and protecting that data, right? And healthcare is one of the leading targets for cyber. Everybody's a target, but healthcare certainly, because of the personal identifiable information, PII. I think privacy data management, cyber risk mitigation, healthcare is definitely top of mind. But I think privacy across everywhere, from retail to energy and utilities to public sector, following, privacy guidelines, setting very solid privacy and data usage guidelines and data protection guidelines are really important. And obviously Europe drove GDPR, and that generally is a default now, even in the US in many cases. So I don't know if any of you want to add anything on privacy or any of that space from your perspective in your industry, but feel free to add on. I think we all know it's a pretty important topic.
Yeah, I can kick off, Cassia, and everyone else still on mute. But yeah, I mean, it's super important, right? And it goes to something that's really important for these consumer-based industries, which is the trust of the shopper, right? If they get it wrong, they lose the trust, and therefore people walk away and go elsewhere. So it's always top of mind, and actually it probably accounted for one of the reasons why video was behind in retail in terms of its deployment, because people were just cautious about how people felt about those video cameras were being used for. So they were okay when it was kind of theft space, but as soon as it started to be tracking, as you said about falling for the online advert, if you were walking around a store and somebody walked up to you based on your shopping habits and started talking to you and knew your name without you introducing yourself, it's kind of getting into that, we say, creepy zone, right? It's not customer service anymore. It's kind of, are you stalking me? How did you know I was here, right? So there's that. There's all that element, as well as just thinking about GDPR itself. But I mean, it's super important for all of these industries to make sure that they stay on the right side of the regulation, that any information that they store is kept secure, and that they let you know about it, right? That's the heart of GDPR, is you become in control of the information that companies are storing about you, and if you want to, they must delete it. So putting that power back into your hands and making you feel that you're now comfortable, because if they're doing something that you're unhappy with, you can stop them. So super important for our industries, and all of these technologies, they have to make sure that they comply with these rules and regulations, or they will lose that trust of the
Absolutely.
Yeah, in GDPR, I mean, just in general, privacy more broadly than GDPR, it's important. Particularly when we're talking about facial recognition and detection, as David mentioned. I mean, from the moment you kind of walk into a mall, not only can the premises, can they photograph you, but these technologies enable them to recognize you and wherever you go within that space. And so privacy will certainly be a concern on the recognition side. I think definitely the Europe goes further than the United States, but in these cases, folks like Microsoft have drafted what some laws should look like that include ensuring notice, so that it requires these entities to use that use facial recognition technology to identify consumers, some kind of notice that clearly conveys that these services are being used, and then clarifying the consent, so that if you're using these services when you enter the premises or proceed to use any of say online services, that the notice is clear, but also it gives you an opportunity to vote with your feet. So with your keyboard, with your thumbs, that I don't want to be imaged. I don't want this facial recognition technology to be used there. And it's essentially, if you know that this is being used, at least you can make a choice to not walk on the premises.
Yeah, I agree. I think that will be an important topic going forward, is that data protection and privacy, making sure you have very strong policies going forward. We did have a question about how to implement AI in normal life. I think that's an interesting one. My own experience on implementing AI in normal life is just looking at what you're trying to what problem are you trying to solve, right? Take a look at that first. What are you trying to solve? And what does that do for you? So in normal life as a business, what problems are you trying to solve? You have too many people for retail, David, for too many people coming in and out of a store and they're not buying anything. There's different types of algorithms that have been built to solve some business problems for business owners that maybe somebody wouldn't have thought of, like parking, for example. Parking, it can be an issue in some cities. And as people get back to work and they get back out there, cities are looking at their transportation network. They're looking at parking. How do you use AI to make sure people know where and when to park, what spaces are open to them? The other piece is like railway, right? There's cities in the US that have a lot of rail in their state. And being able to know if anything's wrong with the train or something's on the tracks, using video, for example, and AI algorithms to know what to look for can be used. It can be done very, very easily. It's just a matter of writing the right algorithm, finding the right provider, being able to pull those pieces together. But those are really, and I say simple, but because I won't write the algorithm, but it's fairly simple. I think one of the ones I really enjoyed watching, the airports. We all go through airports. Someday we're all going to get back to them. I know myself. I've traveled throughout COVID, and it's been interesting to watch the going from your car to the airport, through security to the gate, and what they're doing to really try to improve that journey. And it's not just about COVID, it's about how do you make it a journey where somebody's not waiting in line a lot, right? So digital queuing, for example. So I know that I can go through security at 11 a.m. So I'm going to get to the airport right before, and being able to be more efficient, save people's time. I think we'll start to see more of that throughout the next year or two or three, and in terms of adopting. So I think that will be somewhere that we'll start to see, AI in normal life, because we've all been to airports, whether it's on personal travel or business travel. So.
And we also see it, just for normal life, we see it at home as well. Monitoring temperature of a house, the Nest and those smart thermostats are probably one of the best examples of AI using in your daily life that we see. And you can think about this in terms of, wherever in your daily life there's a pattern of, something that is done every single day, because the AI gets better and better where there is a pattern. And so, you walk into the house, before you had your smart thermostat, you walk into the house and, you turn the temperature down so you can make the house, cooler and, more comfortable for you. And then in the morning, you get up before you leave for work, you turn it up, you want to, save energy. And so the Nest and other, smart thermostat technology, they're essentially using AI in order to do that for you, so that when you walk into the house, it's already comfortable for you, and it knows when you leave as well. And so there are many areas today where we see that AI is being implemented in just our day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I think it'll continue to get much more exciting, and I think it makes life a lot more. You can enjoy a lot more of your life than having to worry about all the non, AI things. I think, trying to enjoy every day we have. So with that said, we're actually nearing the end of our time. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I know this session is being recorded as well, so hopefully you can revisit. And I also want to thank my esteemed colleagues. It's been so great to be on here with you guys, and I really thank you for taking the time. And we'll be back tomorrow for another session. So hopefully if you want some more, join us tomorrow.